They said my brother deserved everything: the house, the money, the future. And me? I was erased with one cold sentence. Have you ever been betrayed so deeply by your own blood that you wondered if love was just a lie? Statistics say over 60% of family inheritance disputes end in permanent estrangement. But this wasn't just numbers. It was my life being stolen in plain sight. I paid their bills, carried their burdens, and they still chose him. That night, I swore my pain would not end in silence. It would become my weapon. The phone rang at 2 a.m., its shrill tone slicing through my sleep. My heart jumped before I even reached for it. It was Mom. Her voice trembled on the other end, as if rehearsed in fear. "Rachel, honey, the hospital bill came in again. Your father's treatment. We don't have the money. Please, sweetheart. They won't release him if it's not paid." My body moved before my brain caught up. I opened my banking app, fingers shaky but automatic. I didn't ask how much, didn't even question why it was always me. I just sent the money. The ping of confirmation filled the silence between us, and I could almost hear her exhale relief. "You're our angel, Rachel. You're the only one we can count on." That sentence had been my curse for years. Their angel, their savior. It sounded like love, but it was a leash. I had built my life around being the dependable one, the daughter who gave without expecting. Loyalty, I told myself, was the highest form of love. Boundaries? Those were for selfish people, weren't they? But the truth was, this wasn't the first call. It wasn't the 10th. It wasn't even the 100th. Hundreds of bills, mortgages, debts, paid silently, invisibly, as if my worth existed only in numbers I transferred at 2 a.m. I stared at the ceiling long after I hung up, numbness spreading through me. What would happen if one night I said no? Would they still call me their angel then? Or would I finally see what lay beneath their gratitude? I didn't know it then, but that night was another stitch in a tapestry of betrayal I hadn't yet seen. Because while I was wiring money into their account, they had already written me out of their lives. Looking back, the warning signs had been flashing for years, 7 of them if I count carefully now. At the time, I painted over each one with excuses. First, the financial manipulation. It always began with a crisis, rent overdue, Dad's medication, a broken pipe. Somehow the emergencies always coincided with my paychecks. I told myself, they need me. I'm lucky I can help. On second, the emotional blackmail. Mom's voice would soften, quiver, then harden like steel. "If you don't do this, Rachel, your father might not make it. Do you want that on your conscience?" My chest would tighten, and guilt would pull the money right out of my account. Third, gaslighting. Every time I questioned the endless requests, they twisted my memory. "You must be imagining it. We never said that. You're overreacting, Rachel. Why are you always so dramatic?" I doubted myself more than I doubted them. Fourth, isolation. They discouraged me from confiding in friends. "People don't understand family the way we do," Dad once said. "If you tell them, they'll judge us. Keep it between us." So I did. And slowly, I had no one left to ask if this was normal. Fifth, information control. Important papers never reached me. Legal documents vanished. Conversations happened in rooms I wasn't invited into. I was included when they needed me, excluded when decisions mattered. Sixth, secret keeping. I'd catch whispers about family plans I wasn't part of, group chats I didn't know existed. Once at Christmas, my brother slipped and mentioned a family vacation they had all taken without me. My mother's eyes flashed, and she quickly changed the subject. "Rachel, pass the potatoes." I laughed it off, though something inside me cracked. 7th, the steady erasure of my worth. Every achievement of mine was minimized. My promotions? Your brother would have done better if he had your opportunities. My home? Too small, but at least you're trying. I was praised only when I was useful, never when I was myself. At the time, I swallowed every one of these poisons, convinced they were medicine. "They love me," I whispered when I wired another payment. "They're just stressed," I told myself when I noticed my absence from the group photos. "And my family is complicated," I repeated, like a prayer, like a curse. But deep down, something in me began to stir. A quiet rebellion, a whisper that said, "This isn't love." That whisper grew louder with each midnight call, with each erased memory, with each time I was made invisible. And yet I still clung to hope, still built excuses to soften the truth, because the cruelest betrayal was still waiting, and when it arrived, it would make every 2 a.m. transfer feel like child's play. The will was read in a cramped lawyer's office that smelled faintly of dust and stale coffee. My mother sat straight-backed, her pearl necklace gleaming as if she'd dressed for a performance. My father shifted uneasily, eyes darting away from mine. My brother Michael leaned back in his chair, smug, confident, as though he already knew the ending. I listened as the lawyer cleared his throat and read the words that carved me out of existence. "All property, assets, and financial holdings are to be transferred to Michael Miller." A pause, a cough, no mention of me. Not one sentence, not one word. It was like the floor fell out from under me. My pulse raced, hands trembling against my lap. The room blurred, as though I were underwater. Then Mom's voice cut through the haze, calm and cruel. "Your brother deserves it." The air vanished from my lungs. For years I had paid their mortgage, covered their bills, held their lives together, and yet here I was, an empty seat at the table of their legacy. I swallowed hard, trying to breathe. The lawyer shuffled his papers, indifferent. Michael smirked, his eyes meeting mine as if to say, "You were never meant to matter." I walked out before the meeting ended, the walls pressing in, the betrayal heavy in my chest. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. Tears blurred the dashboard. For the first time, I let myself ask, was love always a transaction? Had I been blind all these years? I cried until there were no tears left, only anger. And anger has a way of clarifying. In that moment, grief twisted into something sharper, something alive. Rage became my oxygen. For days, I wandered between denial and fury. One moment, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. The next, I replayed every midnight call. Every time I was told I was selfish for hesitating. Every time I was erased. Each memory now dripped with venom. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. At night, I lay awake, imagining conversations that would never happen. Mom apologizing, Dad explaining. Michael admitting he didn't deserve any of it. But the phone stayed silent. No one came. And then a text from Mom. Mortgages due. No apology, no acknowledgement of the will. Just another demand, as though nothing had changed. My hand shook as I stared at the screen. For the first time in my life, I didn't move to transfer money. Instead, I typed a single word, no. The silence that followed was deafening. Hours passed, then days. When her reply came, it was laced with venom. After everything we've done for you, Rachel, this is how you treat us? I laughed bitterly through my tears. What had they ever done for me, except hollow me out until I barely recognized myself? That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep playing the victim. If I was going to survive, I had to become something else. I began small. I started keeping records, every text, every call, every request. I downloaded bank statements going back years. I scrolled through emails, piecing together patterns. My hands shook as I uncovered transfers I had forgotten, thousands upon thousands. I printed them out, stacking the proof like bricks for a wall I was building around myself. And then came the discovery that made my stomach turn. Buried in a folder of bank documents was a loan. Tens of thousands of dollars taken out under my name. The signature looked like mine but wasn't. My parents had forged it. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was theft, a crime. The room spun as I stared at the paper. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my identity, my future. My hands clenched around the document until it crumpled, but I forced myself to smooth it out, to slide it into a folder labeled evidence. Because now I had clarity. They thought they had erased me, silenced me with the stroke of a pen. But they had left fingerprints everywhere. And I was going to use every single one. That night, as I sat with papers spread across my kitchen table, a strange calm settled over me. The tears had dried. The trembling had stopped. I was no longer reacting. I was planning. For years, I had been the obedient daughter, the silent provider, the erased name. But the rules had changed. My silence was over. They had written me out of their lives. Now I would write the ending of theirs. The kitchen table became my war room. Stacks of papers spread across its surface, like pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to assemble before. Bank statements, credit card bills, hospital receipts. All of them bore my name somewhere. I highlighted transactions in neon yellow, circled signatures, cross-checked dates. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. I had been financing not just emergencies, but their entire way of life. Late into the night, I scrolled through old emails. Pleas for help disguised as updates. Dad's car broke down again. Insurance didn't cover this treatment. We'll pay you back, sweetheart. None of it had ever been returned. My inbox was a graveyard of empty promises. I began recording phone calls. At first, it felt wrong, betraying trust even after what they had done. But the very first call justified it. My mother's voice, syrupy sweet. Rachel, if you really love us, you'll take care of this. Michael's future depends on you. Don't let him down. Her tone shifted mid-sentence, from tender to cutting, the way it always did when guilt was her weapon. I played the recording back 3 times, chills running down my arms. Finally, I wasn't crazy. The manipulation was real, and now I had proof. And then came the discovery that made my stomach lurch. Buried inside a folder of scanned documents was a loan agreement I had never signed. Tens of thousands of dollars, my name printed in bold across the top. The signature, my signature, slanted across the bottom. But it wasn't mine. It was a forgery, shaky and careless. My parents had stolen not only my money but my identity, shackling me to debts I had never agreed to carry. The paper shook in my hands. For years, I had blamed myself for being weak, for giving too much, for letting them drain me. But this was undeniable. I wasn't just their ATM. I was their scapegoat, their backup plan, their safety net disguised as a daughter. I sat back in my chair, chest heaving. Around me, the evidence screamed louder than any words ever could. And yet, through the horror, a strange relief washed over me. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. I had been betrayed in the cruelest way. And now, finally, I had proof. I whispered the words out loud, as if naming them gave me strength. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a crime. The next step was obvious. I couldn't fight this war alone. I needed allies. But finding them meant choosing carefully, because the wrong person could tip off my family. I started with a lawyer, a woman recommended by a colleague who had survived her own family implosion. Sitting in her office, I laid the documents across her desk like weapons. She studied them quietly, her brows knitting tighter with each page. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady. "Rachel, this is fraud, forgery. We can build a case, but you need to prepare yourself. It will get ugly." For the first time in months, I felt something like control. Next came a financial advisor. He walked me through years of my bank activity, pointing out patterns I hadn't seen, withdrawals that aligned with family vacations I was never invited to, checks that disappeared into my brother's accounts, debts shifted strategically onto my name. "They've been planning this for years," he said grimly. I added a therapist to my team, someone who could help me steady my mind. Because as much as I needed strategy, I also needed strength. Each session was a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of despair and reminding me that my worth was not tied to the role of savior. And then, the ally I never expected appeared. My Aunt Linda. For years, she had been a quiet shadow at family gatherings, nodding, smiling, never saying much. One evening, she called me out of the blue. "Rachel, I've heard whispers," she said softly. "Can we meet?" We sat in a small cafe, the hum of conversation shielding our words. She leaned forward, voice trembling. "I need to tell you something I should have told you long ago. Your parents, they never saw you as equal to Michael. To them, you were always the backup, the one they could drain while protecting him. They used to joke, 'Rachel will handle it. She always does.'" Her words sliced through me, sharper than the forged signature ever had. Backup, plan B. That was what I had been reduced to. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to hold her gaze. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't watch them destroy you anymore," she whispered. "And because I think you're stronger than they ever imagined." I walked out of that cafe with more than an ally. I walked out with validation, a witness, someone from inside the circle who could confirm what I had always felt, but never dared to name. For the first time in this long, brutal war, I wasn't standing alone, and I knew deep down that terrified them more than anything. For the first time, I wasn't alone, and that terrified them. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked up the driveway to my parents' house. The lights inside glowed warmly, laughter spilling into the night. It was Christmas Eve, the one night when every branch of the family tree gathered under one roof. Cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone came to celebrate. I knew this would be the stage. I knew this was the night. When I stepped inside, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon hit me. My mother greeted me with a tight smile, a kiss on the cheek that felt rehearsed. My father barely met my eyes. Michael swaggered across the room in a tailored suit, raising his glass to the relatives who congratulated him on his inheritance. He wore his triumph like a crown, certain of his victory. I played my part. I smiled, hugged, exchanged small talk. To them, I was still the obedient daughter, too weak to resist, too naive to know better. They didn't know about the folder of documents in my bag, the USB drive tucked into my coat pocket. They didn't know I had chosen this night because the truth, revealed here, would echo far beyond these walls. Dinner was served. Candles flickered across the table. Glasses clinked as carols played softly in the background. My mother raised her glass to toast, her voice steady. "To family," she said, eyes glinting. I held her gaze as I stood, my hand trembling only slightly. "I'd like to make a toast too," I said. A hush fell over the room. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Michael smirked, certain I'd falter, but I didn't. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, laying it on the table. Then I took the USB drive and slipped it into the TV's port. The screen flickered to life. First came the texts, Mom's messages demanding money at all hours, guilt-wrapped commands disguised as love. Gasps echoed around the table. Then the forged loan documents appeared, my name scrawled in fake signatures, proof of crimes committed under the guise of family. Murmurs grew louder, relatives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, the will appeared, the lawyer's letterhead, the cold line that erased me. All assets to Michael Miller. My mother's voice, recorded on my phone, followed. "Your brother deserves it." For a moment, silence reigned, and then the twist unraveled itself like a cruel joke. My financial advisor had done the math. Michael hadn't inherited wealth. He had inherited debt, the very loans taken in my name, the mortgage still unpaid, the liabilities hidden beneath the shiny facade. Gasps turned to whispers. Michael's smirk crumbled, his face blanching as the realization struck. He hadn't been crowned king, he had been shackled with chains. I watched him closely, the way arrogance drained into panic. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The room seemed to shrink, all eyes pinned to him. For years he had thrived on my silence. Now his humiliation was on display for everyone to see, and yet, even in that moment, my chest tightened. This was my brother. I remembered birthdays we once shared, the laughter of childhood before it was poisoned by favoritism. A pang of sorrow cut through the satisfaction. But then I remembered the text, "Your brother deserves it." And I knew this was the truth, no matter how bitter it tasted. The room buzzed with confusion, with betrayal, with pity. The camera of memory seemed to zoom in on Michael's face, from smug superiority to desperate despair. But the night was far from over. The aftermath came swift and violent. My parents leapt to their feet, voices sharp. "This is a setup," my mother cried. "She's always been dramatic, always twisting things." My father added, "Rachel is ungrateful. We gave her everything, and this is how she repays us." The words spread quickly, like poison. Within minutes, I could feel the narrative shifting. Whispers of me being the bitter daughter, the ungrateful child who wanted to ruin Christmas. I had expected it, but the sting was still sharp. Then Michael, broken and pale, turned to me. His voice cracked, no longer smug but pleading. "Rachel, please, help me. You've always helped. You can't let me drown in this. You're my sister." His hands trembled as he reached for me, eyes wide with fear. For a heartbeat, I faltered. The urge to save him, ingrained so deeply, clawed at me. But then I remembered every sleepless night, every dollar drained, every moment I had been erased. My silence now would only make me complicit again. And then came the final twist. I pulled out my phone and played the recording, the one I had saved for last. My parents' voices filled the room, unmistakable. My father's gruff tone, "Let Rachel handle it, she owes us." My mother's cold reply, "She always does, that's what she's there for." The effect was instantaneous. Gasps filled the air. Chairs scraped back as relatives recoiled. The pity in their eyes for Michael turned to disgust for my parents. The whispers of me being ungrateful dissolved into horror at the manipulation laid bare. I didn't have to say another word. The recording spoke louder than I ever could. My parents stood frozen, their carefully crafted facade crumbling in real time. For years, they had painted me as the devoted daughter, useful but forgettable. Now, their own voices had destroyed them. They had just destroyed themselves with their own words. The fallout came quickly, as though the universe itself had been waiting for the truth to surface. Within weeks, the forged loan documents I had uncovered were placed into the hands of investigators. My lawyer guided me through every step, each piece of evidence now a weapon sharpened by time. My parents were summoned for questioning. The quiet suburban respectability they had clung to shattered under fluorescent lights in a government office. Their voices, once commanding in our home, now sounded small, defensive, cornered. Michael, meanwhile, faced the harsh reality of his inheritance. The house he believed to be his crown jewel was already drowning in debt. Creditors called day and night, their patience thin, their demands unrelenting. The bank moved quickly, foreclosing on the property. I drove past once, watching from my car as movers carried out furniture, piece by piece. Michael standing helplessly in the driveway. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone. In its place was fear, the kind that comes when the safety net has finally vanished. For the first time in years, I felt no obligation to rescue him. One afternoon, I sat on a park bench, bundled in my coat as winter wind tugged at my scarf. Children laughed nearby, sledding down small hills. The sky was bright, impossibly clear, as though scrubbed clean. I leaned back, eyes tracing the pale blue expanse above me. It struck me then how long it had been since I noticed the sky at all. For years, I had been buried in bills, demands, phone calls at midnight. Now, the world felt lighter, as if the weight of their expectations had finally rolled off my shoulders. It was in that quiet moment of peace that I heard a voice behind me. "Rachel?" I turned to see my cousin Emily, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She hesitated before sitting down beside me, her hands twisting in her lap. "I heard what happened," she said softly, "and I think I need to tell you something, or two. Her story spilled out in fragments. Years ago, when she had just started working, my parents had pressured her for money too. Promises that it was only temporary, that they'd help her later. But instead, they had drained her savings, left her stranded. "I thought it was just me," she admitted, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I thought maybe I was weak or stupid. But after hearing what they did to you, I know now it wasn't my fault." I reached for her hand, the connection grounding me. I had spent so long thinking I was alone, the sole target of their manipulation. But the truth was worse and also liberating. They had left a trail of wounded behind them. The dominoes were only beginning to fall. When the investigations deepened, my parents tried one final tactic. They requested to see me. My lawyer advised caution, but I agreed, needing closure. We met in a sterile conference room. My mother's eyes searched mine, desperate, rehearsed tears clinging to her lashes. My father leaned forward, his voice low, still trying to command. "Rachel, you've made your point. Drop this. We're family. Family forgives." For a long moment, I said nothing. I thought of every night I had transferred money, every time I had been told I was selfish, every whisper that erased me. I thought of the loan signed in my name, the group chats that excluded me, the laughter that went on without me. And then I spoke, my voice steady. "I forgive you," I said. Their faces lit with hope, misunderstanding. But I continued. "I forgive you, but you'll never touch me again. This is the last time you will ever have access to me, to my life, to my future. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It means I'm free." The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father's shoulders slumped. They knew it was over. Walking out of that room, I felt lighter than I ever had. The anger had burned away, leaving clarity. I hadn't won by destroying them. I had won by reclaiming myself. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, no phone buzzing with demands, no guilt hanging over me. I poured a glass of wine, raised it to the empty room, and whispered, "To freedom." But freedom is only real when you know how to protect it. And I had learned, painfully, brutally, exactly how. The first step to reclaiming myself was silence. Not the silence of fear I had lived in for years, but the silence of refusal. I changed my phone number. I blocked my parents and Michael from every channel they had ever used to reach me. Emails, social media, even the landline I kept for emergencies. They were cut off one by one, like cords tying me to a drowning weight. It felt brutal, but also liberating. No contact wasn't just a rule. It was a shield, a declaration that their chaos no longer had a claim on me. At first, the guilt gnawed at me. I would hear their imagined voices whispering, "You're cruel. You abandoned us. You'll regret this." But each time the doubt crept in, I forced myself to remember the years I had spent drowning under their demands. Saying no was not cruelty, it was survival. I practiced the word in small ways. When a colleague tried to offload their work onto me, I said, "No, that's not my responsibility," and felt the strange thrill of standing firm. When an old acquaintance hinted at borrowing money, I said, "No, I can't do that," without apology. Each refusal was a stitch in the fabric of a stronger self, one no longer defined by sacrifice. Months later, I signed the papers for a house of my own. It was small, tucked at the edge of town, with peeling paint and a garden that needed work. But when I turned the key and stepped inside, it was mine, truly mine. No forged documents, no hidden debts, no ghosts of midnight phone calls. Just walls that held only my voice, windows that opened to my sky. I remember standing in the empty living room, sunlight streaming across bare floors, and feeling a swell of power I hadn't known before. I wasn't rescuing anyone. I wasn't carrying anyone else's burden. For the first time in decades, I was simply existing for myself. This was just the beginning of my real life. Freedom gave me space to dream again. I poured my energy into my work, taking risks I had always put off because of my family's endless crises. With the guidance of my financial advisor, I stabilized my accounts, cleared the debts they had left in my name, and began saving for my future, not theirs. But the transformation wasn't only financial, it was personal, social, human. I sought out people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. Slowly, I built a chosen family, friends who celebrated my victories without envy, mentors who pushed me to grow, communities where vulnerability wasn't exploited but honored. It felt strange at first, being cared for instead of used. When a friend showed up with soup after I caught the flu, I cried quietly in my kitchen, overwhelmed by the simple kindness. For years, I had mistaken manipulation for love. Now I was learning what genuine connection felt like. Then came the invitation, an email from a conference organizer, subject line, keynote speaker request. They had heard about my story, through whispers, through the case that had rippled outward, through the relatives who finally spoke up. They wanted me to speak on family betrayal, resilience, and rebuilding. My hands trembled as I read the email. Me on a stage telling the truth that had once suffocated me. For so long I had been erased. Now my voice was not only heard, it was sought after. On the day of the conference, I stood behind the podium, looking out at a sea of faces. Some wore the same haunted expression I once carried. Others the tentative hope of people seeking healing. I told them my story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. The betrayal, the collapse, the rebuilding. I ended with the words that had become my mantra. They left me nothing, but I built everything. The applause rose like a wave, and for a moment I felt lifted by it, as though every scar had transformed into light. Walking off that stage, I knew the journey wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about empowerment, healing, and hope. I had not only survived, I had thrived, and that was the future I deserved.